And we're live on match day as Doug reaches for a buffalo wing. He's got it! Oh, and he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! What a finish! There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi.
Hey Immigrantly family, this is Sadia Khan, and we are not airing a rerun this week by accident. This past Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that birthright citizenship stands. Trump's executive order, the one this entire episode is built around, is struck down. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, and he didn't write around Wong Kim Ark. He wrote through him, leaning directly on that 1898 case to affirm that everyone born on US soil is a citizen. The administration's new argument that a child's parents had to be domiciled here, a sharper version of the same too foreign logic used against Wong, didn't survive contact with the historical record. 3 justices dissented. One quick fact. Trump posted that Congress could simply pass legislation to end birthright citizenship instead. Not true. It's written into the Constitution, so undoing it requires a constitutional amendment. 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states. That bar is high on purpose. So why are we sharing this episode again? We ended this episode on a cliffhanger. Not knowing how the court would rule, now we know, and the court built its answer on the exact history we covered. If you don't know who Wong Kim Ark is, this week's ruling is just a legal technicality. If you do, it's a 130-year-old promise getting kept by name by the current Chief Justice. This one is real. A constitutional ruling, not a temporary block. But the fight just moved. Restrictionist groups are already framing the laws as leverage for more deportations and tighter visa rules, and Trump says he'll push Congress anyway. Same pattern this episode has traced since 1790. The target shifts, the question of who gets to be American doesn't. So here's the original episode. Listen for Wong Kim Ark, Julia Lynch, and that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The court just ruled on its meaning in real time. So here we go. Come back next week for a new Immigrantly episode. Wong Kim Ark, born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrant parents, is only 21 years old when he sues the US government for the right to his own citizenship. It's 1895, and Wong has just returned home from a trip to China. Although he still lives in the US, Wong's parents, who used to own a store in San Francisco, have moved back to their home country. Their son simply decided to visit. After all, his wife is also in China. In an ideal world, Wong would bring his wife back to the US with him. But in recent years, a new law called the Chinese Exclusion Act has severely restricted the travel and immigration of Chinese people to the US. The act is largely fueled by an economic concern that Chinese laborers are creating too much competition for jobs. But as we'll soon see, the economic reasons are paired by a distinctly racial fear-mongering that paints Chinese people as so-called enemies and invaders of Western culture. Now, Wong is unaffected by the law because he was born in San Francisco in 1873, long before the act was passed. And by the way, of the 14th Amendment, which was added to the Constitution before he was born, Wong is a US citizen by birth. Or at least that's what he thought. When he returns home after many weeks aboard a steamship crossing the Pacific, immigration authorities stop him at the port and deny his entry into the country of his birth. He spends the next 4 months marooned in San Francisco Bay. The situation here is strange and probably frustrating for a few reasons. Wong, as I mentioned, is a citizen and has his paperwork to prove it. But it's also frustrating because he's made this exact same trip back to China 4 years ago and had no problem returning to the States. Now, it's unclear if authorities actually give him a good reason the moment they stop him. But we know now that in light of the Chinese Exclusion Act, crackdown on Chinese immigration is at an all-time high. Authorities will later argue that because he's ethnically Chinese, he is, quote, subject to the Emperor of China, unquote, like his parents are, and therefore can't be a US citizen. So Wong takes on the US government, and when his case finally reaches the Supreme Court, Wong Kim Ark's story becomes a landmark decision, one that shapes the future of American immigration law. The question on the table is Wong Kim Ark, a young man born to immigrant parents, protected by the 14th Amendment, which states he is a US citizen by birth? Or was the 14th Amendment never meant to apply to people like Wong Kim Ark in the first place? Immigrants and their US-born children. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Immigrantly. I am your host Sadia Khan. If you've been listening for a while, you know this podcast is all about discussing culture, history, and identity with nuance. Here, we explore the immigrant identity without diminishing the essence of the human experience. Our episode today is inspired by recent events whose consequences are still unfolding as we speak. It's the question of birthright citizenship, a buzzword that's been floating around in the news for the past few months after Donald Trump's first day in office in January of 2025. One of his many executive orders that day was a ban on birthright citizenship for the children of undocumented immigrants.
Go ahead. Sir, this next order relates to the definition of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment of the United States.
Yeah, that's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
What about that one in the courts? That one is likely to be passed.
Could be. We think we have good grounds, but you could be right. I mean, you'll find out. It's ridiculous.
As we heard with Wong Kim Ark's case, challenges to the 14th Amendment are not necessarily new. For Wong, in the end, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. They reaffirmed that children born in the United States are citizens under the 14th Amendment, regardless of their race or national origin of their parents. In theory, Wong's case cemented 14th Amendment citizenship rights for immigrant families. 130 years later, Trump is using that same amendment to pull back on birthright citizenship for certain people. Regarding birthright citizenship, or BRC for the sake of this episode, the amendment reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, for Trump, the issue is around a few things. The first is the phrasing of one part in particular, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Listeners, pay close attention here. What does that mean? To be subjected to the jurisdiction of a place? The same phrase was used to challenge Wong Kim Ark and suggest that he was more subject to the jurisdiction of China than he was to the US. Does that same concern hold water now? Well, the second issue is the intention of the amendment, which for Trump and his supporters was exclusively meant for the millions of African Americans formerly enslaved or free at the end of the Civil War. He argues that it was not intended for immigration. Now, since Trump's order, there has been so much pushback from state courts and advocacy groups that the order isn't even in effect right now. Already, the order has posed a lot of practical questions. Does one man alone have the power to strip away our amendments so easily? And if so, do we have the right to challenge him? At its core, an executive order like this one seeks to decide who gets to be an American. America is now arguing against its own definition of who belongs and who doesn't. Not to mention, the definition is constantly changing. To understand the 14th Amendment's intentions, as well as investigate what truly constitutes a US citizen, let's start with a bit of history. When it comes to the question of citizenship, you may be surprised to find that at the national level, this isn't even a well-defined issue until around 1790. That's about 14 years after the Declaration of Independence and a few years after the first official constitution. It's a time when, for the most part, many powers are left to states. An American citizen is any quote-unquote free white person born in the country or else born to US citizens. As you can imagine, if each state has slightly different rules for citizenship, this can easily cause conflict, which is exactly what happens. In 1790, we get the first official instance of a nationally recognized uniform law for United States citizenship. It's known as the Naturalization Act of 1790, and it allows any free white person of quote-unquote good character to apply for citizenship if they've lived in the US for at least 2 years. After they are naturalized, their kids under the age of 21 are considered citizens as well. Notice I said white person. Now, this is important as this act excludes Black Americans, enslaved or free, and even excludes Native Americans. The irony is so messed up and sad, to say the least. But for European immigrants from places like France, Scotland, Ireland, and England, the act comes at the right moment. America is starting to become a pair of open arms for these immigrants, many of whom are trying to escape the political chaos of Europe.
Here, at the turn of the century, almost all Europeans enter freely, except undesirables such as criminals. For all new arrivals, there is a medical examination to weed out those with serious illnesses and dangerous diseases. Once in the new land, what lies ahead?
These open arms, however, don't last long. As the years go by, America's view of immigrants changes in response to politics, religious differences, and, of course, war. Some begin to fear that European immigrants are bringing with them radical political ideas that threaten to upset the still new and fragile US government. So this is where we start seeing conversations around good, well-behaved immigrants versus dangerous immigrants who upset the careful balance of American political ideals. Soon it's decided that living in the US for 2 years isn't enough time for someone to become a naturalized citizen anymore. So that number raises to 5 years and then raises again to a whopping 14 years. A few years later, with the passing of what is known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. Among other things, these acts not only extend the time that the new immigrants have to live in the US before they can become citizens, it also gives the government the right to arrest, detain, and deport so-called suspicious aliens during wartime. The US passes these acts in response to a simmering conflict with France. They fear that when all hell breaks loose, French immigrants may be loyal to their home country instead of the US at the end of the day. Now, this is important as we talk about birthright citizenship because what we are seeing is the development of the definition of a true American citizen. See, it's as much a question of loyalty and fear as it is one of rights. As the US continues to see large waves of Western European immigrants, we also see a lot of growing political and religious differences between new immigrants and American citizens. This is where the fear kicks in again, and we start seeing a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment.
Not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country.
The system is broken because there are people who are exploiting human beings for material gain. There are coyotes, those are human smugglers, charging decent people large sums of money to come and work to put food on the table for their families.
Again, Americans want mass deportation, period. Unscrupulous employers who hire illegals, they shouldn't be in business because hiring illegals is not America first.
From the 1840s to around 1889, 14 million immigrants enter the country and bring political and religious beliefs that challenge what many Americans already take for granted. Under naturalization laws, these immigrants will one day have the power to control US politics as full-fledged citizens, and for some, this is a terrifying prospect. No wonder the bar for citizenship changes from one year to the next. But in 1844, we see one of the first cases to address the issue of BRC for immigrant families, Lynch versus Clark. Born in 1819 in New York, Julia Lynch is the daughter of two Irish parents who, according to most sources, were simply visiting the US when they gave birth to Julia. They apparently had no intention to stay even after their daughter was born. Shortly after Julia's birth, they all returned to Ireland. Now, Julia continues living in Ireland for the next 20 years or so. After her uncle living in New York, dies, Julia is suddenly caught in an issue of inheritance. Is Julia entitled to her uncle's inheritance? As the courts would eventually decide, yes, she is. Despite her prolonged residency in Ireland and her two Irish-born parents, Julia Lynch is a US citizen by birth. It doesn't matter that her parents were temporary visitors. While we still don't have an official BRC law amendment yet, the Lynch case already sets a standard of what was commonly known as usually at the time. It's a fancy term that just means you are a citizen based on where you're born as opposed to your bloodline, that is, the citizenship of your parents. See, the US is not the first of its kind. During this time, other nations, including Great Britain and many countries in South America, have usually. So in the States, it's kind of seen as a given in Julia's case. But how does birthright citizenship officially get added to our Constitution? As we get into the 1850s and 60s, there's another population of people challenging American citizenship laws. Remember, up until the Civil War, only free white persons qualify as citizens? We know this for a fact thanks to the 1857 case Dred Scott versus Sanford, which declares that African Americans enslaved or free are not and cannot become citizens. This case arises after Dred Scott, born into slavery in Virginia, attempts to sue his enslavers for his freedom on the grounds that he had spent some time in Illinois, which was not a slave state. The courts decide that because of Scott's race, he's not even a citizen and therefore has no citizen rights. So it's clear that US citizenship is also heavily attached to race. While white European immigrants and their children qualify as citizens within a few years of living here, African Americans can never and will never have that right. So says the law. But in the years that follow, as the Civil War comes to an end, something changes. In 1865, the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, and 3 years later, the 14th Amendment explicitly guarantees citizenship to anyone born in the United States. Finally, for the first time in American history, this includes the newly freed African American population. Formerly enslaved individuals now have the same citizenship rights as white Americans. These amendments don't immediately cure the racism that robbed Black Americans of their citizenship in the first place. The future, as we all know, will still be met with civil rights challenges. Plus, the law still doesn't include Native Americans, who, according to the government, are not subject to US law because they live in political communities distinct from the US. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty wording of the Constitution, listeners. Remember that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof? Hold on to it, because now I'm going to dissect it for all of you. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof means that someone can't just be born in US territory, but must also be subject to the US government's legal powers. I know this is a lot of information to synthesize, but just bear with me. This will be important later. And Native Americans, by the way, won't receive their BRC until 1924. But one thing is undeniable. These two amendments have made incredible headway. It's the inception of what we now call birthright citizenship. So BRC is a constitutionally ingrained law now, and previous cases like Julia Lynch's Irish ancestry but US birth have established that BRC applies to immigrant families. But now we've got to come back to Wong Kim Ark.
The Colonel's cooked up a new $10 bucket of the day just for you. Monday, 24 nuggets for $10. Tuesday, 8-piece fried chicken for $10. Wednesday, 10 wings for $10. Thursday, 8 tenders for $10. Friday, 24 nuggets for... Oh, you guessed it, didn't you? $10. The $10 bucket of the day deal. Every weekday. Only at KFC. It's finger-licking good.
Prices and participation vary while supplies last. Not available on third-party ordering platforms. Tax extra.
The most memorable gifts aren't found, they're made. Zazzle is a custom marketplace where you pick any product, a mug, a card, a tote, a phone case, and make it personal. A photo, a name, an inside joke. The kind of gift that actually fits the person. That's what 30 million customers have been coming back to Zazzle for over 20 years to find. Right now, save 25% on your first order at Zazzle.com. That's Zazzle.com. Make it zamazing.
If all these standards are in place by the time Wong comes along, why is his birthright citizenship up for debate? Well, we need some context here. In the years following the Civil War, America is still seeing waves of immigration. From 1880 to 1920, 20 million immigrants entered the US, and the demographics are changing. While most immigrants are still from Western Europe, there is now an uptick in Southern and Eastern European immigrants from places like Italy, Poland, and Russia. But there's also a wave of Chinese immigrants in the 1850s eager to make a fortune in the California gold mines. According to the new amendments, the children of all these immigrants are automatically US citizens. We saw years later with Irish and German immigrants that Americans are kind of afraid of changing demographics. We're seeing it in this moment. In the previous decades, this basically led to the US changing its naturalization laws. It also led to lots of anti-immigrant sentiment and politics, which again is so obvious and prevalent right now in this moment. Wong Kim Ark becomes the target of a very similar response to Chinese immigrants. This is why we start seeing things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the law that bans Chinese laborers from traveling and immigrating to the US. We start hearing concerns among people who don't believe that anybody with Chinese ancestry should even qualify for birthright citizenship, especially under the new Exclusion Act. So Wong's case becomes what's called as a test case to finally put the issue to rest. The Supreme Court rules in favor of Wong and reaffirms his BRC regardless of his parents' origin. But two of the Supreme Justices make the same case that's still being used to deny Native Americans their citizenship at this time. That wording again, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The minority opinion states that this wording cannot apply to someone with quote-unquote alien parents with foreign ties and allegiances. And the opinion is also heavily racialized, implying that there's something about Asian immigrants that is particularly harmful. It eventually leads to what is now often referred to as yellow peril. The fear that Asian immigrants are invading the Western world and attacking its values. This idea of so-called alien ties doesn't go away just because Wong wins the case. There's still a lot of anti-Asian bias among many. So it's probably no surprise that US continues to restrict Asian immigration throughout the early and mid-20th century. Even as we enter the 1950s, most Asian nations now have an annual quota that limits the number of immigrants to around 100 people per country. On top of that, non-white immigrants still can't qualify for naturalized citizenship thanks to that old law from 1790, which states that only white people can be naturalized citizens. Meanwhile, groups like the Asiatic Exclusion League in California push to not only exclude Japanese immigrants, but also completely strip their US-born children of their citizenship. The California state legislature supposedly endorses the league's aims. And while none of this is enough to overturn Wong Kim Ark's case, it all demonstrates just how fragile birthright citizenship still is. That is, if you aren't white. Many still believe that non-white people could never assimilate into American society. And because so much of this conversation circles back to race, the children of these Asian immigrants are still at risk, seen as permanent outsiders, no matter where they were born. Despite all this, Wong's case becomes the standard in BRC cases, and there's not too many severe threats to the law throughout most of the 20th century. But according to one article, Republicans in Congress have been consistently introducing bills challenging birthright citizenship since the 1990s. These bills eventually fail, but not before they garner significant support from lawmakers and the general public alike. Like in 2011, when Arizona legislators introduced bills to define state citizenship, requiring at least one parent to be a U.S. citizen or legal resident.
Last week, state lawmakers introduced bills defining an Arizona citizen as someone having at least one parent who is either a U.S. citizen or a naturalized citizen. Those pushing the bills hope the move will force the courts to re-examine the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment.
The Arizona bill would even require a different type of birth certificate for children born to non-citizens. In the end, the bill is incredibly controversial and faces a lot of backlash, protests, and negative press for being unconstitutional. The bill dies once it reaches the Senate. But this isn't an isolated incident. Around the same time, Texas officials refuse to issue certificates to children born to undocumented parents.
Immigration advocates say in the last 2 years, denial of birth certificates has become an issue for hundreds, if not thousands, of undocumented parents in Texas. The IDs Texas will accept, like a Mexican driver's license or a border ID card, would require that the parent return to his or her country of origin to try to obtain them. Other acceptable forms of ID, like a Texas concealed weapons carry permit, they're not eligible for.
Once again, there is so much backlash against this bill that the state eventually agrees to issue the certificates. But at the end of the day, one thing is clear. BRC has become a big Republican talking point. Like in this 2010 interview with South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who links birthright citizenship to the larger question of immigration.
People come here to have babies. They come here to drop a child is called drop and leave. To have a child in America, they cross the border, they go to the emergency room, have a child, and that child's automatically an American citizen. That shouldn't be the case. That attracts people here for all the wrong reasons.
As for the general public, according to one study by the Pew Research Center in 2011, 40% of around 1,300 people surveyed support the elimination of birthright citizenship for undocumented immigrant families. By the time Donald Trump comes along, the issue of BRC already has a history of controversial, mixed opinions. All Trump has to do is add fuel to the fire.
But now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
By the end of his first term, he's enacted a policy that makes it more difficult for foreign-born pregnant women to receive temporary visitor visas. This arises out of the fear of birth tourism, basically coming to the US just to give birth and get citizenship for your child. It's the same issue Lindsey Graham spoke on a few years ago. But the policy has an exception for 39 nations, 31 of which are in Europe. And as we know, the US has had a strong preference for European immigrants since the 1800s and the 1900s. Trump intensifies his stance during the 2024 presidential campaign and reveals his plan to end birthright citizenship for undocumented immigrants. It's important to note that his campaign is full of inflammatory language that really paints all undocumented immigrants as, guessed it right, dangerous criminals.
They come from mental institutions. They come from jails, prisoners. Some of the toughest, meanest people you'll ever see. Who wants this? Who wants to have prisoners coming into our country? Who wants to have people who are very sick coming into our country? And they enter our country illegally. Nobody could afford this. Nobody could do this. And even morally, it's so wrong. My order will also end their unfair practice known as birth tourism, where hundreds of thousands of people from all over the planet squat in hotels for their last few weeks of pregnancy to illegitimately and illegally obtain U.S. citizenship for the child.
We've seen a lot of this anti-immigrant sentiment before, after various waves of immigration in the US. Only now, the demographic has changed. And many of Trump's targets are from Central and South America instead. And all of this brings me back to the present, with Trump's executive order that aims to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants and temporary visa holders. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that for a long time now, people have used the 14th Amendment's phrase, and I know I keep going back to this, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, to deny others their birthright citizenship. Trump is doing something similar, claiming that undocumented immigrants and temporary visa visitors are not subject to U.S. legal authority, so their U.S.-born children can't be citizens of the country. What's more, he argues the same thing that judges have argued as far back as Wong Kim Ark, that the 14th Constitutional Amendment was only meant to apply to African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved. So far, American history challenges this theory. Take Julia Lynch, for example, The woman, born in the US to Irish parents, her parents were temporary visitors, and Lynch was still deemed a US citizen. Attempts to strip Asian Americans of citizenship have likewise failed. With these precedents, the backlash Trump has received makes sense to me, especially as an immigrant. Some district courts have condemned the law as unconstitutional. Others go as far as to call it inhumane. As a result, courts, individual families, and activist groups like the ACLU have sued the administration. This stopped the order from going into effect, but we've all seen that rules and rights can change from one year to the next. Birthright citizenship is still a protected constitutional right, even for undocumented immigrants. But we still don't know what the Supreme Court will decide. The court held its first hearing on May 15th. We probably won't know the court's decision until late June or July at least. And this episode will most likely release around that time. Plus, in the course of these lawsuits, this issue has taken on a whole new level. The Supreme Court is deciding on more than just birthright citizenship. It's deciding whether or not lower court systems even have the power to stop executive orders. Executive orders must still be constitutional, right? Otherwise, where do we draw the line? Now, I know this episode covered a lot of ground. We've spent a lot of time getting into constitutional language, which, by the way, wasn't easy. And to be honest, it can be up to interpretation. So much of how we talk about birthright citizenship has changed from decade to decade. But for me, the common thread here is the constant debate over who can be an American, by birth or otherwise, especially when it comes to minority communities. Because so frequently we've seen this become an issue for Native Americans, who, by the way, were here before any of us came to this country, formerly enslaved Black Americans, Asian Americans, or now Hispanics and Latinos. We know that the language was clearly racialized. You know what? It makes me wonder, what does American mean if, for the white Americans here who fought to exclude everyone else, their own ancestry traces back somewhere else, right? England, Scotland, Ireland, France? And regarding Trump's executive order, we'll just have to wait and see how the Supreme Court decides on Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. And if this episode releases after that happens, I'll be sure to follow up.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
So that's where we left it the first time, me telling you we didn't know what the Supreme Court would decide. Now you do. 6 justices agreed with Wong Kim Ark's lawyers in 1898 and with families who sued in 2025. If you're born on US soil, you're subject to its jurisdiction and you are a citizen, regardless of who your parents are or how they got here. The domicile theory the government tried this time, the updated, more sophisticated version of your parents are too foreign for you to count, didn't survive contact with the historical record. I keep coming back to something I said the first time we recorded this. What does American mean? For the people who keep trying to narrow who counts, when so many of their own families trace back to England, Scotland, Ireland, France, immigrants themselves a few generations ago. That question didn't get resolved today, but the Constitution for now came down on the side of the kid born here, not the politics of the moment. If you take one thing from this rerun, let it be this. Rights that feel permanent are rarely permanent by accident. They are permanent because someone like Wong Kim Ark or the plaintiffs in this case refused to accept being written out of the story. We don't get to be grateful for a constitutional right working as written. We get to notice that it almost didn't and stay paying attention for the next time someone tries. This episode is produced by me, Sadia Khan, written by Michaela Strother, fact-checking by Shamid Nawaz, with this update fact-checked against the Supreme Court's opinion in Trump versus Barbara, and same-day reporting from NPR, NBC News, and CNBC. Our editor and sound designer is Lou Raskin. Theme music for Immigrantly is by Simon Hutchinson. Additional music by Epidemic Sound. Come back next week when we have another important conversation. And please share this episode with a friend, a skeptic, and don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Because guys, that's how we grow our podcast and our footprint. Thank you again for spending this time with me and this particular episode. Until next time, take care.